Hey everyone, it's Tobes, and welcome to your second monitor. Today is the next video in my series of Secrets of Strixhaven Commander deck techs. I'm releasing a new Strixhaven Commander deck every Thursday through the end of June when Marvel Superheroes drops, in addition to my usual Monday Commander deck tech videos. So if you have a request for a specific Strixhaven Commander you'd like to see me build, let me know in the comments below. As you see, today our commander is Tam, Observant Sequencer, an academically minded mage student at Strixhaven, part of Quandrix College, or at least she was. We first met Tamira in the Lorwyn Eclipsed story, after she was lured through an omen path along with her friends Abigail, Kirill, and Sonar. The gang returned after their adventure, with a new friend in tow, and got caught up in a mess involving the Dawning Archaic. Its reality-warping energies held back the students, as well as Ajani and Chandra, but Tam was able to use her paradox magic to forge a way through those energies to find Jadzi, the Oracle of Arcavios, performing a ritual to calm the Archaic. To everyone's surprise, Tam shoved Jadzi into the Wild Magic Nexus before jumping in after her, pausing only for a tearful goodbye to the others. The last thing we get to see is Tam and Jadzi reforming in the alternate reality campus of Hexhaven. It's anyone's guess if we'll ever get to see her again. Oh. Anyone else excited about Reality Fracture? Let me know in the comments. In the meantime, I'm excited to show you what I put together for Tam, but before we get started, let's go over my deck building template. I like to build my decks around my commander. I want to show off why the card is so cool and why I thought it deserved a deck of its own. So I take about 30 cards and put them toward doing whatever my commander asks of me. This is our game plan. It's what we do at the table and how we try to win. 30 more cards go towards supporting that game plan in the form of card advantage, acceleration, and interaction pieces. I usually run 1 or 2 sweepers, sometimes more if it would play into the game plan, sometimes not at all, and I almost always keep to a floor of 38 lands. That way I can always hit my land drops and cast my spells and, play commander. So let's talk about our commander. Tam, Observant Sequencer, is a 4/3 legendary Gorgon wizard for 2, a green, and a blue. She has a landfall trigger. Whenever a land we control enters, she becomes prepared, which means while she's prepared, we can cast a copy of her prepare spell, Deep Sight, from exile, and when we do, it unprepares Tam. Deep Sight is a sorcery for a green and a blue that lets us draw a card and gain 1 life. So at first glance, Tam seems like a classic Simic value commander, but there's a lot more going on with her. Her Deep Sight prepare spell is sweet, giving us a way to not just draw a card, but to repeatedly trigger Magecraft style effects every time we cast it. We have to pay each time, of course, but that cost is always a little more affordable because we're playing lands to prepare the spell in the first place. And when we do cast it, we get an extra card and a bit of life for our trouble, which means as long as we recently hit a land drop, we always have a little card advantage in the command zone. So what is all that? Landfall, drawing multiple cards each turn, casting multiple spells each turn, having extra lands and mana, and all that on a body with relevant stats? It sounds like Tam wants to do it all. And while we could build a deck around any one of these things, that's not really in keeping with her flavor. See, what I didn't say in the intro is that Tam was, spoilers, created whole cloth by Jace's magic. We don't know all his purposes for her, but she's a Gorgon and a wizard as a nod to the fact that she's his vision for the daughter he wanted to have with Vraska. And since she's his daughter, she's studious and intense, an intellectual for whom even the dictates of reality are mere suggestions, and her cool, collected demeanor shows that she doesn't just want to do it all, she can. So why shouldn't we? Our deck touches on all corners of Tam's potential. Since she becomes prepared when lands hit the battlefield, we have a bunch of other landfall effects, making tokens and pumping our creatures and giving us ways past our opponent's defenses. Since she gives us a sorcery to cast almost as often as those lands are hitting, we have cards that reward us for all the spells we're casting. Since that'll mean we have lots of cards in hand, we have ways to ramp out even more lands to pay for those spells and to trigger that landfall, as well as cards that get better the bigger our land base becomes. And since she wants to do it all, we have ways to play extra lands each turn, to be rewarded for our extra draws and our extra spells, and to feed all our extra resources into mana sinks for extra value. What can I say? Tam is kind of extra. And who can blame her? Jace wanted her so much, he practically created an extra new universe where she could exist, which is wild. Imagine how it must feel to have a parent, so to speak, who wants so badly to fix reality that they bring into being a whole new version of it, with every problem they had with the original reality revised to their smallest whim, and you are a part of those revisions. He wanted her so much that her absence, her impossibility, was one of the problems with reality he set out to correct. Talk about pressure. It's no wonder she works so hard in her classes and thinks so far ahead, and, so far, it seems to have all worked out for her. So that's our inspiration for this deck's playstyle. Patience, careful sequencing, and an intense investment in our future turns. If we can manage all that, we'll find ourselves at the top of the hill by endgame, our mountains of value looming over our opponent's playmats, and all because we took our time to plan before putting those plans into action. That is the reward for our excessive preparation. You'll enjoy this deck if you like seeing synergies and payoffs pile higher and higher with every turn you take, or if you like plotting your turns out meticulously, trusting your deep insight to carry you to victory in the end. So, as usual, this Moxfield list we're going over today is linked in the video's description. At the bottom of it, you will find a considering section, filled with cards that I considered putting in the deck, but ultimately which didn't make the cut for me. However, if you have a bigger budget or a smaller one, if you like what I've done with this kind of spread out game plan and you want to go harder with it, or if you want to focus more on one of these particular ways to get value out of TAM, then that considering section is a great place to begin when you build your own TAM Observant Sequencer deck. So let's begin with the section that's probably most relevant to people who are thinking about building a TAM deck. It's the Landfall section. These are all cards that have a similar trigger to TAM in that they trigger when a land we control enters. So we're going to start with Hormigaunt Horde from the Warhammer 40k decks. This is X and a green for a 1/1 Tyrannid with Ravenous. Ravenous means it comes in with a number of 1/1 counters on it equal to X, and if that number is 5 or more, we draw a card when it enters. So remember, that's just the X, not the total mana value, but if you can get X equals 5, then you get a 5/5 and you get a card as well. Pretty good. And it has Endless Swarm, which is a landfall trigger. Whenever a land we control enters, you may pay 2 and a green, and if you do, return this card from your graveyard to your hand. Meaning, we play this and X equals 2, let's say, because it's turn 3 and we want to spend our mana. So we get a 2/2, that's fine. We use that 2/2 to attack or block or whatever else we need to do with it, and when it dies, we just wait until our next landfall trigger, and we can pay 3 mana and get this back in our hand and recast it bigger, because now we have more land in play. So it doesn't matter that you don't draw a card, if you don't draw a card the first time you cast this with Ravenous, because it's pretty likely that eventually it's going to come back again and again and draw you more cards as it does. Next up we have Genemorph Imago from Edge of Eternity. This is a green and a blue for a 1/3 flying insect druid with a landfall trigger. Target creature has base power and toughness 3/3 until end of turn, but if you control 6 or more lands, instead, it's base power and toughness 6/6. So, sort of the floor for this is a 1/3 flyer for 2, which is already solid, and then whenever we have our landfall trigger, we can target itself and make it into a 3/3, or maybe a 6/6. A 3/3 or 6/6 flyer that we spent 2 mana on is great, even if it can't block with those stats, unless of course we find a way to get a land into play, on an opponent's turn. We can also hit our other creatures with this, especially if we have multiple lands come in during the same turn. We can hit multiple creatures and pump them up to 3/3s or 6/6s, depending on how many lands we have. But it does not say target creature you control, which means we can hit our opponent's creatures with this. Usually we don't want to make a creature that an opponent controls into a 6/6, unless we've just got something much bigger. But maybe an opponent has Galta in play, and we need to depower their 12/12, and a 6/6 is okay for that. But it's even better if early on we're able to make their creatures into 3/3s, and that makes it harder for them to block. But typically, the Imago is here for us to pump up our own creatures. It's just worth noting that you don't have to only hit your own creatures with it. Next up is Springheart Nantuko. This is a sweet card, but a little complicated if you're not familiar with Bestow. 1 and a green gives us a 1/1 enchantment creature insect monk with Bestow for 1 and a green. So Bestow is an alternate cost that lets us pay 1 and a green, and instead of it being a creature, it's an aura with enchant creature. So we can either have this come in as an insect or an aura, presumably enchanting one of our own creatures, because it gives the enchanted creature +1/+1. And it has this landfall ability that I will explain after I read it. It says, whenever a land you control enters, you may pay 1 and a green if this permanent is attached to a creature you control. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that creature, and if you didn't create a token this way, create a 1/1 green insect creature token. Meaning, if this is enchanting one of our creatures, when our land comes in, we can pay 1 and a green and make a copy of the creature. That's pretty great. We have another land come in, we can pay another 1 and a green and make another copy, and just keep doing that. It's really sweet. as a way to like copy really cool big creatures, or even creatures like Geomorph Imago. That can be really nice. However, if we don't pay the 1 and a green, we just get a 1/1 insect. Or if the Springheart Nantuko is not an aura, if it's just an insect, then we get a 1/1 insect every time we get the landfall. So 3 scenarios. The Nantuko is a creature, which means it has landfall, make an insect. The Nantuko is an aura, and we don't pay the 1 and a green when land enters, which means we make an insect. Or it's an aura, we do pay the 1 and a green, and instead of an insect, we make a token copy of the creature that it's enchanting. Yeah, pretty nice. Next is Earthbender Ascension from the Avatar set, of course. This is 2 and a green for an enchantment that says when it enters, we Earthbend 2, meaning we take one of our lands, we make it into a 0/0 elemental creature that's still a land, and we put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. It then has a delayed trigger. If ever it dies or is put into exile, we return it to the battlefield tapped under our control, under its owner's control, I should say. And yeah, because it left the battlefield, it no longer is a creature, but at least it's a land and it came back in tapped. So it's a great way for us to get another landfall trigger if it dies or gets exiled when it's Earthbent. But that's not the end of that trigger. When Earthbender Ascension comes in, we Earthbend 2, and then we Rampant Growth. We search for a basic, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. So we don't get to search for that card and then Earthbend it. We have to Earthbend one of our lands that's already in play, but it does give us one of our lands Earthbent for only 1 more mana than the Rampant Growth effect normally costs. And it doesn't end there because it has its own landfall trigger, which is triggered by this Rampant Growth effect bringing a land into play. Landfall, whenever a land you control enters, put a quest counter on this enchantment. Quest counters don't have an inherent mechanical meaning, they're just used by the card that they're on. It says, when you do, if it has 4 or more quest counters on it, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, and it gains trample until end of turn. It can be that Earthbent land, since it's now a creature, but it doesn't have to be. So the idea is essentially, once this enters, it's going to get its first quest counter right away. And then, once you've played 2 more lands, so now it's at 3 quest counters, every land after that triggers Earthbender Ascension to put a 1/1 counter on one of our creatures and to give that creature trample until end of turn. Repeatable value in addition to initial value, all for 3 mana. Great, love it. Next is Scoot Swarm. It is a monster. This is 2 and a green for a 1/1 insect with landfall. Whenever a land we control enters, we make a 1/1 green insect creature token. Seems good. But if we control 6 or more lands, instead we make a copy of Scoot Swarm. So the idea is, if we have 5 lands in play and Scoot Swarm, when we play a land, instead of a 1/1 insect, we get an extra Scoot. We play another land, both of them trigger. Now we have a total of 4 Scoots, the original and 3 copies. We play another one, and now we have 8 Scoots. We play an explosive vegetation, and they all trigger twice because that's 2 lands coming in, and it goes to 32 total Scoots. You can see how this gets out of hand. Scoot Swarm is a kill on sight card, which is why it's $5.50, and it's just a lot of fun. It can really get out of hand, especially if you are able to get a couple of copies initially. Like, you play this on turn 3, and you're just going to be making some insects for a while your opponents scramble to kill it. But if you play this on turn 5, or turn 6 rather, before your land drop, you immediately make a second Scoot, and now your opponents have to kill both of them to get rid of them. It just really gets out of hand, and it's a lot of fun. I like to have cards in the deck that change the texture of a game sometime, and Scoot Swarm being such a removal magnet, which means our opponents aren't using removal on our other better cards, yeah, it's fun and it's intimidating, and you know, who doesn't like having a million little copies in play? Next up is Tatyova Benthic Druid, a classic Simic commander. This is 3, a green, and a blue for a 3/3 legendary Merfolk Druid, originally from Dominaria 2018, that says landfall, when a land you control enters, gain a life and draw a card. So this is Tam's Deep Sight effect, but sort of on its own. You know, we don't have to pay the extra mana in order to get it to go off, but Tatyova doesn't have as much power as Tam and costs an extra mana. So both of these are fine either way, but we're built around doing lots of other stuff with Tam, so Tatyova is just in here as a nice supplement to what we're doing. It just works well in any Simic landfall deck. Grappling Kraken is next. This is a Foundations card, 4 and double blue for a 5/6 Kraken with landfall. tap a creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. Just that simple. Tap something down, it's not going to untap during its opponent's next untap step. Great. That's evasion for us. It's removal, because it just stays tapped down for at least a whole turn cycle. It doesn't mean it's off the battlefield, but it's just as good, because that means it's not able to block us this turn or our next turn. And it's not able to block any of our other opponents before our next turn. So, yeah, pretty sweet. And being able to hit this many, many times in this deck as we continue to play more and more land, yeah, it helps us be really sort of surgical in our decision as to what we want to tap down and what we want to get out of our way. And we can use it politically and say, like, look, I'm playing a land, I get to target something and put a stun counter on it after tapping it down. Opponent A, if you want to leave me alone for a turn cycle, I'll hit one of opponent B's things. If it's 2 turn cycles, I'll let you decide which one. You know, something like that. Primeval Bounty is next. This is an expensive do-nothing enchantment. Do-nothing enchantment is to say an enchantment that when it enters has no effect until you do something else to trigger it or until something else happens to trigger it. So a little bit of a way of sort of putting down these kinds of enchantments, but I really love them. And Primeval Bounty gives you so much value and is so easy to get to in this deck that it's just totally worth it. And very inexpensive in Foundations right now. So this is 5 and a green for an enchantment that says whenever you do anything, you get something. Whenever you cast a creature spell, you make a 3/3 beast creature token. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you put 3 1/1 counters on a creature you control, and Landfall, whenever you have a land enter, you get 3 life. So if you make your land drop, you get 3 life. If you cast a Rampant Growth type effect, that's a non-creature spell, so you're putting 3 counters on something, and that land will enter, and you'll gain 3 life as well. And then you use that mana to cast a creature spell, you get a beast as well. So yeah, these can really, this can really get out of hand. It does take some time to get to it, but in this deck, I mean, a lot of the time you can just play this on turn 4, sometimes even turn 3, and get value almost right away. Next up, we have Rampaging Badeloths. This is 4 and double green for a 6/6 beast with trample, 6/6 trampler for 4 and double green, that's Colossal Dreadmaw vibes. But also it has Landfall, make a 4/4 green beast creature token. These tokens do not themselves have a trample, but making a 4/4 every time you have land come in, that's pretty sweet on top of a 6/6 trampler. So there we go. Avenger of Zendikar is just a classic for these kinds of decks. 5 and double green for a 5/5 elemental that when it enters, we make a number of 0/1 green plant creature tokens equal to the number of lands that we control. A lot of the times, you know, it looks like you would have at least 7 of them, and a lot of the time we're going to have more than that. You know, sometimes we're going to end up with 10, 15, or 20 different little plants, and they're all 0/1s, but whenever we have a land enter, we can put a 1/1 counter on each plant creature that we control. We don't have any plant creatures in this deck except for these tokens, so getting to see them all build up and build up and build up every time we play land, very nice. Finally, another Edge of Eternity's card, Glacier Godmaw. This is 5 and double green for a 6/6 Trampling Leviathan with incredible art that says when it enters, we make a Lander token. Lander tokens are Wayfarer's Baubles. It's an artifact that says pay 2, tap, and sack this token to Rampant Growth. Search for a basic, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So this is a great mana sink for us, and a nice way to go find one of our many basics, but also, the Godmaw has Landfall itself. When a land you control enters, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain Vigilance and Haste until end of turn. That haste can be relevant more than you think, but just being able to say, Landfall, make this into a 7/7 Vigilant Trampler, just on its own is already very good. If we have a couple of lands come in, that's going to trigger a couple of times, and we're going to be able to see that on all of our other creatures as well, just becoming bigger and vigilant and hasty. Neat. So that's our Landfall section. Next up, I want to show off the other ways we can get lands into play. So we have a section of things that give us extra land drops, or at least put a land into play from our hand, which is sort of like an extra land drop if we've got a land in play. So Broken Bond is one of our removal spells. This is from Dominaria 2018. It's 1 and a green for a sorcery that says destroy target artifact or enchantment, and you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. So if you don't have a land in play or in hand when you cast this, this is a slow naturalize because it's not an instant. but that's fine. A lot of the time, we're doing this on our own turn anyway, so sorcery speed doesn't hurt us, and if we wait till our turn, we may have drawn a land from either our land draw for that turn, one of our many draw effects, or even just Tam's prepare spell, and then we can use that effect from Broken Bond to put it into play and trigger all our landfall or re-prepare Tam. Nice. Loot Exuberant Explorer is next. This is the Foundation's loot. 2 and a green for a 1/4 legendary Beast Noble that says you can play an additional land on each of your turns. These effects, these sort of, is it exploration effects? I guess so. Yeah, like just, that's why he's the Explorer. It's just very powerful in this deck because we have more lands than normal and we normally run plenty of lands and we're able to draw so many extra cards. In addition, Loot says for 4 and double green and tap, we can look at the top 6 cards of our library and reveal a creature card with mana value less than or equal to the number of lands we control from among them and put it on the battlefield, and then put the rest on the bottom in a random order. So this just goes directly onto the battlefield. We just find ourselves a creature as long as we had enough mana to cast it, or enough lands, I should say, to cast it. It does cost us 6 to do this, but if we have a situation where we are kind of hurting for cards in hand, but we've got plenty of mana, this is a great mana sink. Next we have Splunking. Love this card. 2 and a green for an enchantment that says when it enters, we draw a card, and then we may put a land from our hand onto the battlefield. So just Growth Spiral. And if we put a cave onto the battlefield this way, we gain 4 life. We don't have any caves in this deck. Couldn't make them work. They just weren't good enough for us. So don't worry about that. Just worry about the fact that it comes in and has a Growth Spiral attached to it. But more importantly, it says lands we control enter tapped. Or enter untapped, rather. Which means any land that says this enters tapped, or it enters tapped if, or it enters untapped unless, or whatever it may be, these are all replacement effects. And if a replacement effect is affecting something, if they're all affecting the same thing, and we control that thing, we're the player affected by it. So we get to apply those effects in whatever order we want. So that means we always apply Splunking last, which means all of our lands enter untapped, no matter what else they may say. Great. Love this effect. Being able to get this on top of Growth Spiral. Growth Spiral is normally 2 mana, so this is 1 extra mana for something that permanently makes all of our many tap lands come in untapped. Yeah, that's great. Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath is next. This is 1, a green and a blue, for a 6/6 legendary Elder Giant with 2 enters triggers. When Uro enters, sacrifice it unless it escaped. Escape is an alternate casting cost. For double green, double blue, and exile 5 other cards from your graveyard, we can cast Uro from our graveyard for that cost. Meaning, there's got to be at least 5 other cards in the graveyard besides Uro, and then we spend double green, double blue, and exile 5 of those cards, and then Uro will enter, and we won't have to sacrifice it. So you cast it for 3, you have to sacrifice it when it enters, but then you can cast it for this 4 and the exiling of those cards later, and it will come back in and stick around. But why do you care about that? Well, when it enters or attacks, which means the first time it enters, it's going to get both of these triggers, and we can put them in whatever order we want. We will sacrifice it either way, and we'll still get this effect. But then if it stays in play, we're going to get its attack trigger too. So, when it enters or attacks, we gain 3 life, and draw a card, and then we may put a land from our hand onto the battlefield. So this is draw a card, and you can put a land from your hand onto the battlefield. That's Growth Spiral. Or gain 3 life and draw a card. That's Revitalize. So we get a combination of the two, and that's pretty good. Next is Case of the Locked Hothouse. This is a case enchantment, which means it costs 3 and a green and has 1 effect. And then it has a solve condition, meaning at our end step, if this case is not solved and we've met this condition, it is now solved. And then once it's solved, it has this solved effect as well as the original effect, which will still remain. The original effect is explore. We can play an extra, or exploration. We can play an additional land on each of our turns. And then at our end step, if this is not solved and we control 7 or more lands, it becomes solved. And once it's solved, it doesn't just let us play an extra land on each of our turns. It also says we can look at the top card of our library at any time, and we can play lands and cast creature and enchantment spells from the top of our library. So being able to play lands off the top of our library, incredibly strong. using that to prepare Tam, and then using her ability to draw us a card, maybe gets one of our other lands off the top if we had 2 lands in a row, and then we see a creature or an enchantment, we can use Case of the Locked Hothouse's ability to cast that from the top. Yeah, just really gives us great card advantage and cycles through our deck. Next up is Brolios of Ferris Band. This is a sweet Foundations Jumpstart card. 3 and double green for a star legendary Centaur Scout with power and toughness each equal to the number of lands we control. So we call this effect the Maro effect, off of the first card, Maro, that had this. We have several of these Maros in the deck, and we'll talk more about them as we get to them, but Brolios coming in and probably being at least a 5/5 and scaling up as we play more lands, very good. But in addition, when Brolios attacks, we get to Growth Spiral. We draw a card, and we can put a land from our hand onto the battlefield. So a little bit of card draw, a little bit of an extra land drop, and just makes itself bigger. Love it. Next, Bonnie Paul. Really like Bonnie Paul. 3, a green, and double blue, so a total of 6 mana, for a 6/5 legendary Giant Scout with reach. Obviously, Giants should have reach. That says, when Bonnie Paul enters, create Bow, a legendary blue Ox creature token with Bow's power and toughness are each equal to the number of lands you control. So Bow is also a Maro. So 6 mana gets us a 6/5 Reacher and a Maro token. And Bonnie Paul says whenever you attack, draw a card, and you can put a land card from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield. So this is an even better version of Growth Spiral because we can get cards out of our graveyard if we happen to have gotten them there somewhere. Get lands, that is. It's especially nice because it does not say when Bonnie Paul attacks. It's whenever we attack. As long as we attack with anything and Bonnie Paul's in play, we get this free, better Growth Spiral. Nice. Kodama of the East Tree is next. This is 4 and double green for a 6/6 legendary spirit with reach that says whenever another permanent we control enters. If it wasn't put onto the battlefield with this ability, you may put a permanent card with equal or lesser mana value from your hand onto the battlefield. And then it has partner, which is not relevant to this deck. So this effect is sort of saying, let's say you cast Bonnie Paul. Oh, Kodama of the East Tree sees it enter. You can put Brolios into play, because Brolios costs no more than Bonnie Paul does. And Bonnie Paul was not put into play with Kodama's ability. Brolios itself was put into play with Kodama's ability, so it will not trigger and let us put Case of the Locked Hothouse into play. However, what's nice is Bonnie Paul will enter, we'll get that trigger, and we can put Brolios into play, let's say. Bonnie Paul's enter trigger resolves and makes Bow. Bow has no mana value, which means Kodama will see that enter because it does not say a non-token permanent. It just says whenever another permanent you control enters. So our token enters, and then we have to put a permanent with equal or lesser mana value from our hand onto the battlefield. What permanents do we have that have 0 mana value? All of our lands. So Bow comes in, and we get to make a land drop. We play a land, and we get to make a land drop. We play a Soul Ring, and we get to make a land drop, or play something else with mana value 1. The point is, Kodama of the East Tree's floor is one of our permanents has entered in some way that wasn't from its own ability, and at the very least, we get to take one of our cards in hand, one of our lands in hand rather, and put it directly into play. It doesn't even say tapped. So yeah, this is just a bunch of extra land drops each turn, assuming we have enough permanents to play and enough lands in our hand. Great. I wonder if there's a way for us to get more cards in hand with Tam. Finally in this section, relevant to her story and also just a good card in this deck, it's Jadzi, Oracle of Arcavios. 6 and double blue gives us a 5/5 legendary human wizard with discard a card and return her to its owner's hand, to her owner's hand. So we can bounce Jadzi in order to protect her and maybe recast her if we want to do that, which we probably will. You'll see why in a moment. And it lets us put cards in our graveyard, which is not something we use a lot of, but we do have some ways to use it. For example, Bonnie Paul lets us play lands from our graveyard when we get her attack trigger. So if we use Jadzi and we discard a land to bounce Jadzi, we can play that land by just attacking once Bonnie Paul's in play. We've got a couple of different ways we can use it. Also, Jadzi has a Magecraft trigger, which is an ability that triggers whenever we cast or copy an instant or sorcery. It says we reveal the top card of our library, and if it is a non-land, we can cast it by paying a single generic mana rather than its mana cost. And if it's a land card, we put it on the battlefield. It does not say tapped. Now this is a very powerful ability, letting us cast any spell we see on the top for just a single mana, or if we see a land, we put it in onto the battlefield, untapped. But we remember, Jadzi is an 8 mana card, so this is very powerful, and it's appropriately so. Notably, I know you're thinking, well, how many instants and sorceries do we have in this deck? Well, we've got 11 sorceries and only 3 instants, so that's 14. Except our commander has a sorcery stapled to her that we get to use every time we cast it and then play another land, we can cast it again. Whenever she's not prepared, we just play a land, Tam becomes prepared, and we can cast a 2-mana spell that draws us a card, gains us a life, and if Jadzi is in play, before it even resolves, we reveal the top card of our library, and we can cast it if it's a spell for a single mana. And if not, we put a land into play, and we re-prepare our commander. Amazing. But that's not all Jadzi can do, even though that's a lot. Jadzi is a modal double-faced card. We can play her as this creature on the front, or we could cast her backside, which is a sorcery, meaning we have one more sorcery in the deck that's not being counted by Moxfield, for 2 and double green. It says we can put any number of land cards from our hand onto the battlefield. So if we have a bunch of lands in hand, we've just drawn a bunch of cards, great, spend 4, put all of them onto the battlefield. Doesn't even say tapped. And then, if we control 8 or more lands, we may discard a card, and if we do, we return Journey to the Oracle to its owner's hand. Meaning, let's say we have 5 lands in play and 3 lands in hand. We spend 4 mana, put the 3 lands in hand into play, we now have 8 or more lands. We have any other cards in hand, we can discard one, and we can put this back in our hand to either cast it again as Journey to the Oracle, or to cast it as Jadzi. That's why we can discard a card off the front and return Jadzi to our hand, because maybe at some point we've drawn a bunch of cards and we need to get lands out of our hand. So we discard one of those cards, put Jadzi back in our hand, cast Journey to the Oracle, get all those lands into play, discard one more card, put it back in our hand, and either that turn, which could be the case because we did just put a bunch of lands into play untapped, or another turn, we recast Jadzi as the front side. Being able to keep bouncing her or recurring, sort of buying back Journey to the Oracle over and over, very powerful effect for us. So that covers our extra land drop section. Now let's talk about the things that reward us for drawing all these extra cards that we are probably going to draw thanks to Tam. Emrakul's Messenger is 1 and a blue for a 2/1 Eldrazi Fairy Rogue with Devoid. Devoid means that this card does not have a color. I know you're looking at it and you're saying, but Topes, it is blue. No, it's devoid, and it functions in all zones. This card doesn't have any colors. If someone tries to pyroblast it, it doesn't work because it's not a blue card. Devoid doesn't come up that often, but sometimes, so just worth remembering what it does. Otherwise, this is a 2-mana, 2/1 flying Eldrazi Fairy Rogue that says whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token with sacrifice this token to add a colorless mana. So this is sweet. It makes every time we draw our second card, which is going to be, hopefully, most every turn once we've got Tam in play, our second card every turn comes with a free token that we can use to block. We can maybe pump up and use for damage if we want to attack with it, but more importantly, we can sacrifice it at instant speed, even the turn it comes in, because it does not require us to tap it, to make a colorless mana, and it gives us a little acceleration. So every time we draw our second card each turn, we're kind of getting a token that's also a treasure, a creature that's also a treasure. So yeah, very nice. Next we have Joriel, Monvoli Recluse. This is 1 and a green for a 1/2 legendary human druid with unbelievable Izzy art. This is one of my favorite arts in the last 10 years, probably, just really great. That says, whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a 2/2 green cat creature token. Sweet. Draw an extra card, get a creature with it. We can't crack it for mana the way we can those Eldrazi spawn, but these are 2/2s, and that's solid. And Joriel says, for 4 and double green, until end of turn, creatures you control have base power and toughness XX, where X is the number of cards in your hand. This is a number that can get pretty big for us, honestly. And even if it's not huge, like it's 5 or maybe 6 or something, spending 6 mana to make all of our creatures into 6/6s, including however many cats we have sitting around, that can be a lot of power for us. Especially since we don't have to use this on our turn. We can use this in response to an opponent attacking us, and suddenly we've got a board of 5/5s or 6/6s that they probably wouldn't have attacked into, but now we're gonna sacrifice some of our creatures to kill all of theirs. Seems good. Next is Teferi's Ageless Insight. This is 2 and double blue for a legendary enchantment that says if you would draw a card, except for the first one you draw in each of your draw steps, draw 2 cards instead. So this is another do-nothing enchantment, but it does so much for us after it's in play. Imagine having Tam prepared, and then we cast Deep Sight. We gain a life and draw 2 cards. That's 2 mana for 2 cards, and we can keep doing that. And then every other one of our draw effects, of which we have so many in this deck, draws us 2 cards. The only time Teferi's Ageless Insight doesn't draw us 2 cards is the card we get during our draw step anyway. So being able to just overload our hand, I don't typically put this into decks, even decks that care about card draw. But in this deck, it really gives us a lot, and being able to ramp our way toward it and then ramp into other things using it, because we have so many ways to play out our extra lands that are in our hand, either with growth spiral effects or exploration effects, it just gives us so much. So yeah, that's why we're running it. Similarly, we have Teferi Temporal Pilgrim. I know you're thinking, this is not the M21 Teferi, it doesn't match with the Ageless Insight card. Yes, but it's very good in our deck. This is 3 and double blue for a 4 loyalty Teferi Planeswalker. With a static ability, whenever we draw a card, we get to put a loyalty counter on Teferi. That is, every time we draw a card for our turn, every time we draw a card with Deep Sight from Tam, any of our other card draw, Teferi gets bigger. We can 0 Teferi to draw a card, which will put a counter on him. So this is sort of like a +1. Not exactly, but kind of. And it just gives us a free card every turn. That seems good. We can also -2 Teferi to make a 2/2 blue spirit creature token with Vigilance that says whenever we draw a card, put a 1/1 counter on it. So we get to protect Teferi. Maybe Teferi comes in, we -2 him immediately, get our 2/2 spirit, and then we draw a card off of Tam's prepare spell, and now Teferi has gone up to 3 loyalty, and that spirit is a 3/3. That seems like a good protector, and we can just keep doing that if we're drawing cards in other ways to keep Teferi in the loyalty. But if we draw enough cards, we can get Teferi up to -12, probably not. Probably he's going to be attacked down before then, but you never know. And it says target opponent chooses a permanent they control and returns it to its owner's hand, then they shuffle each non-land permanent they control into its owner's library, meaning they bounce one thing that isn't a land, or one thing of any sort, it could be a land, and then everything else that isn't a land that they have gets shuffled away. This is a huge board wipe for only one player, it's true, but if we have enough draw going on, it's not impossible for us to hit this. It's just not that likely. So yeah, in this, we want to use it to draw extra cards and to make these tokens that get benefits from all the cards we're drawing. So that covers our Draw Matters section. We have one more section that I've put into the main part of our game plan, even though, as you will soon see, our ramp is a big part of our game plan. That next section is our Spellcraft section. Spellcraft is a term I'm using just to represent cards that care about us casting spells. Some of them are Jadzi, who has Magecraft. We also have Quandrix Apprentice, which has Magecraft as well. This is a green and a blue for a 2/2 human wizard with Magecraft. Whenever we cast or copy an instant or sorcery, we look at the top 3 cards of our library, we can reveal a land from among them and put it in our hand, and put the rest in the bottom in any order. This is pretty sweet. We use Deep Sight from Tam while Quandrix Apprentice is in play, and the way it works is Deep Sight goes on the stack, triggers Magecraft, and we first look at the top 3, reveal a land, put it in our hand, and put the others on the bottom, and then we draw a card and gain a life. So this turns all of our Deep Sights into a draw 2, with one of those being a revealed land, assuming we don't whiff and miss a land on top. But with all the lands we have in our deck, it's pretty likely we're going to see a land most times when Quandrix Apprentice triggers. Next we have Wingblade Disciple. This is a card that cares about us casting our second spell each turn, as opposed to our drawing our second card each turn. So 2 and a blue for a 2/2 human monk with flying, so it's a wind drake, that says flurry. When you cast your second spell each turn, make a 1/1 bird with flying. Great. So every time we have a turn where we cast our second spell, whether it's our turn or not, it's probably going to mostly be our turn though, we get a bird in addition. So that's going to trigger when we draw off of Tam and her deep sight, if we haven't otherwise drawn our second card already that turn. So another way we trigger in a similar way to Quandrix Apprentice. We've already seen Primeval Bounty. It cares about us casting spells at all. Creature spells get us tokens, and non-creatures get us 1/1 counters, and of course, it's got Landfall for us to gain life. But next we have Eryximethys, the Slumbering Isle. This is 2, a green and a blue, for a 12/12 Legendary Kraken. So 4 mana for a 12/12 is good, except it enters tapped with 5 slumber counters on it. Again, slumber counters are not used, or they're just used by Eryximethys. They don't have an inherent mechanical meaning. However, as long as Eryximethys has a slumber counter on it, it's a land, which means it's not a creature. And whenever we cast a spell, we may remove a slumber counter from Eryximethys, and Eryximethys taps for a green and a blue. So the idea here is, for 4 mana, this comes in as a land with 5 counters on it, that once it untaps, we can tap it for green and blue. And that helps us cast spells, and once we cast a spell, any kind of spell, we can remove a slumber counter from Eryximethys. It is a may, we don't have to. But we would like to get to the point where we aren't tapping it for mana, we're tapping it for damage. So we want to get to the point where it's a 12/12. Now, it taps for mana even when it is a creature. But it's nice to be able to have this come in and be, even though it's a tap land that we had to pay for, it's a land that taps for good mana and eventually will become a big creature. I do want to make mention that if you look at the rulings on Eryximethys, Eryximethys cannot be played as a land, but while it is a land, it will still trigger Landfall. That means it's a land once it's entered the battlefield, but triggered abilities that see lands entering, like Landfall, will see that a land has entered rather than a creature, and so will trigger, which means Eryximethys is another Landfall source for us when it first comes in. Kind of cool. And that covers our Spellcraft section. Oh, hey, did you just like the video? Nice. I appreciate that. I'm just kidding. You don't have to like the video if you don't feel like it. I'm grateful for you being here either way. I don't mind if you like it, though. That's fine. Anyway, thank you for watching so far. We're going to move on now to our support sections for our game plan. We're going to start with our card advantage section. This is the card advantage section. I usually tag this as draw. It doesn't mean all these cards do the draw card action. It just gives us access to more cards. So for example, Bushwhack is a single green for a sorcery that lets us Lay of the Land if we choose to, search our library for a basic land, reveal it, put it in our hand and shuffle, or we can have target creature we control fight target creature we don't control. Either we find a bush or we whack something. So a nice modal card, usually we're going to use it in this deck to find land if we haven't found enough of it. We've got so many ways to get it into play, especially if we get it early on, but later in the game, we use it as a removal spell. So good modality for it. We've seen the Hormigaunt Horde. It lets us draw a card when X is 5 with its Ravenous ability. Biomechan Engineer is next. This is a green and a blue. We've got a lot of cards that are just 2 mana in these colors. For a 2/2 Insect Artificer, that when it enters, we make a Lander token. Another way to make a Lander token and thereby give us access to a little bit of acceleration. It also says for 8 generic mana, we can draw 2 cards and make a 2/2 colorless robot artifact creature token. So this is expensive for drawing these cards, but the idea is that this comes in early, makes us a way to ramp, and then later on, as a mana source, as a mana sink rather, we've got ways to make extra token creatures and to fill up our hand again. So once we've got a lot of mana, which is not hard to get to in this deck, we can activate this sometimes multiple times in the same turn, and we don't have to even do it on our turn. The robot doesn't come in tapped, so we can use this as a surprise blocker, plus draw 2 cards. Pretty good, and trigger all of our things that care about when you draw your second card during each turn. If it doesn't have to be our turn, this can trigger that right away. Hunter's Talent is next. This is a class enchantment that does so much for us. A class is not quite the same as a case. It comes in and it has this first ability. And then at sorcery speed, we can level it up to level 2 for this much mana, and then it has both abilities. Once it's level 2 at, again, sorcery speed, we can pay to level it up to level 3, and then it has all the text on the card. So you just sort of level it up and unlock more of its value. So for 1 and a green, we get a class enchantment that says when it enters, target creature we control deals damage equal to its power to target creature we don't control. So just a bite. For 1 and a green, it is sorcery speed, but it's rabid bite, and there's nothing wrong with that. Once we go to level 2, it says whenever we attack, target attacking creature gets +1/+0 and gains trample until end of turn. So we can give one of our creatures a little bit of evasion and a little bit of a pump, and that's pretty alright. But especially nice is at level 3, at the beginning of your end step, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. Tam is power 4. So as long as we have the mana that we can sink into Hunter's Talent and get it up to level 3, if our commander's in play, we draw an extra card at the end of every one of our turns, and that's pretty great. Planar Genesis is next. This is a green and a blue for an instant that says look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may put a land card from among them onto the battlefield tapped, and if you don't, put a card from among them into your hand and put the rest on the bottom in a random order. So this is a solid, I don't know if you'd call this a growth spiral upgrade exactly, but it's the idea that you get to, I guess it's a side grade. You get a card no matter what. Whether that card is a land that's going into the battlefield tapped, or it's a different card that's going into your hand, you can, if you want, put a land directly into your hand rather than on the battlefield tapped. Either way, Planar Genesis lets you dig 4 deep and pick the thing you like most and put it in your hand, or if it is a land, you can go ahead and put it right onto the battlefield tapped. So yeah, pretty good. All instant speed too. Quandrix Apprentice, we've already seen, can help us hopefully find more lands whenever we cast or copy instants or sorceries. I don't typically run Cultivate anymore just because of its mana efficiency, but in a deck like this, where you want to make more land drops, I think it fits great. So for 2 and a green, we have a sorcery that says search your library for up to 2 basic lands, reveal them, put 1 on the battlefield tapped and the other in your hand, then shuffle. Great. Lets us get a land drop, because it puts a card in our hand that we can make our land drop with, and also Rampant Growths us. So it's the same total mana value as Lay of the Land plus Rampant Growth, and that's what it does. Pretty good. We've seen Loot. Loot gives us the ability to pay 4 and double green and look at the top 6 and just get a creature into play, assuming its mana value is not greater than the number of lands we have, which is card advantage. That seems good. Splunking lets us draw a card, and then we can put a land into play. So does Uro. Case of the Locked Hothouse gives us the ability to play lands off the top of our library, and eventually play lands, creatures, and enchantments off the top of our library. All very nice. Migration Path is next. This is 3 and a green for a sorcery that is just Explosive Vegetation. Search your library for 2 basics, put them on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. Explosive Vegetation is just a double Rampant Growth, but rather than being 2 and double green, it's 3 and a green. So the same thing, but Migration Path is one of my favorite versions of this because it also has cycling for 2 generic mana, meaning we can pay 2 and discard it from our hand to draw a card. If we don't want to cast it in order to find more land, maybe we look for a different card. Maybe it's late in the game and we've got lots of land and we really need card draw. Cycling it is a good option for us. So yeah, very nice. Next up, the Sad Robot. Solemn Simulacrum is 4 generic mana for a 2/2 artifact creature golem that says, when it enters, we may Rampant Growth. Search for a basic, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. And when it dies, we may draw a card. So it's doing everything we need it to do. Love the Sad Robot. We've seen Teferi's Ageless Insight. It doesn't actually draw us cards, but it does make all of our many card draw effects better. Brawlios. Again, when Brawlios attacks, we get to draw a card and then put a land from our hand onto the battlefield. Again, doesn't even come in tapped. Great. With Teferi's Ageless Insight, we're drawing 2. Neat. Tatiova has Landfall, gain a life and draw a card. We've got Teferi. We can 0 Teferi to draw a card. We have not yet seen Vorinclex. Vorinclex is 3 and double green for a 6/6 legendary Phyrexian Praetor with Trample and Reach. So 5 mana for a 6/6 Trample Reach is already solid. And it says when Vorinclex enters, we search our library for up to 2 forest cards, reveal them, put them in our hand, and shuffle. So that's card advantage. That's us getting 2 cards in hand, even though they're both lands. And it also does not say 2 basic forests. So we have plenty of forests that are dual typed. They're both forest and islands. Since those are forests, it doesn't matter that they're also islands, so we can find those if we want, and we usually will want to. We also have the ability to pay 6 and double green, big mana sink, exile Vorinclex, and then return it to the battlefield transformed under its owner's control, but of course only as a sorcery. It becomes the Grand Evolution, which is a saga. Sagas work like this. When they first come in, they get a lore counter, and we get to do whatever that first chapter ability is based on the number of lore counters it has. Then at the start of our first main phase on our next turn, we put another lore counter on it, and we get the second ability. The turn after that, at the start of our first main phase again, we get another lore counter, we get our last ability, and normally, once that ability is resolved, we sacrifice that saga. But not so much this time, as you will see. Anyway, the first chapter ability, which again, we will get as soon as we have resolved Vorinclex's 8 mana activated ability, we will mill 10 cards, and then we are allowed to put up to 2 creature cards from among the milled cards onto the battlefield. So directly onto the battlefield from our graveyard where we milled them. So this is one of the other ways we can get cards in our graveyard that we might be able to play out with Bonnie Paul. It's an option. But in any case, just getting 2 free creatures, assuming we hit them. And again, we're running 30 creatures other than our commander. So that's 29 cards besides our commander and Vorinclex that we're able to hit, hopefully, with the first chapter ability, just the first one. Second ability is distribute 7 +1/+1 counters among any number of target creatures you control. These don't have to be our creatures. It doesn't say target creature. Well, it does say creatures you control. Sometimes I should read the card. Anyway, it lets us pump up our creatures. We can put all 7 on one creature if we want. Sure, all the eggs, one basket. And the third ability is, until end of turn, creatures you control pay a single generic mana, and this creature fights target creature you don't control. So this is a removal effect. We can take all of our big creatures, and even if each one is only going to fight one other creature, each one, for a single mana, can fight another creature. So they all get sort of a mana fixed prey upon. Very nice. In addition, we exile this saga and return it to the battlefield, which means front face up. So we won't sacrifice it. It will be exiled, and it will come back as front face Vorinclex, which again will enter and let us search for 2 forests, reveal them, put them in our hand, and shuffle. So Vorinclex draws us, quote unquote, 2 forests when it enters, and then once it completes the Grand Evolution, it'll do it again. That's some card advantage, plus a lot of other value. Expensive, but good. And we've already seen Bonnie Paul gives us that sort of better growth spiral when we have an attack, and Jadzi lets us look at the top card and cast it, or if it's a land, put it on the battlefield, or accelerate out some lands. Good either way. So that covers our card advantage section. Let's talk now about acceleration, which as usual I've just tagged as ramp. So of course we're running Soul Ring. We've got a lot of expensive cards in this deck, and we do have a lot of land ramp, but a little bit of artifact ramp doesn't hurt. 1 generic mana for an artifact, taps for 2 colorless. Very powerful. Of course we're going to run this. Similarly, we're going to run Arcane Signet because it's a 2 mana untapped rock. 2 mana for an artifact that makes 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. So in this deck, blue or green. Yeah, 2 mana to get 1 more source of mana into play that is both of the colors we need, and it even comes in untapped. Sure, sounds good to me. We've seen the Biomechan Engineer. It makes a lander token when it comes in, so that's a Wayfarer's Bauble that we can use to get an extra rampant growth effect. Emrakul's Messenger, whenever we draw our second card each turn, doesn't have to even be our turn, we make that Eldrazi Spawn token that we can sacrifice for mana. We have Farseek in our deck. This is our rampant growth equivalent in terms of spells. 1 and a green gives us a sorcery that lets us search for a plains, island, swamp, or mountain card, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. We don't have any mountains, any swamps, or any plains, but we have a number of islands. It does not say basic either. So this is another one of those situations where we want to fix both of our colors, so we're going to find, if we have one left, a dual-typed land that's both an island and a forest with Farseek. And we've got several of them that just come in tapped anyway, so we're not losing anything when Farseek puts it into play tapped. Nice. We've seen Planar Genesis. Hopefully it finds us a land. If not, it puts a card in our hand. We have Sakura Tribe Elder next. This is Steve. This is 1 and a green for a 1/1 Snake Shaman that says, sacrifice this creature in order to rampant growth. Love it. Steve existing as a way for us to, do the normal play pattern of have someone attack us, block with Steve, and if their attacker doesn't have trample, we can sack Steve in response. that creature remains blocked so we don't take any damage, and we get a rampant growth. But it's especially nice because Steve is a rampant growth that sits on the battlefield waiting for us to need it. You know, we can do it right away if we want to, or we can do the trick I just mentioned with the combat and the blocking. But it's also the case that if we really need to re-prepare Tam, Steve is there to help us do it. By finding us a land right away, that land will enter, Tam will be prepared, and now we can use our mana, although not that land we found because it came in tapped, unless of course we may have Splunking in play, to cast Tam's Deep Sight sorcery. Yeah, love Steve. We've seen Cultivate. Cultivate finds us a land, puts it in our hand, finds us another one, puts it on the battlefield tapped. Earthbender Ascension comes with a free rampant growth effect. Horizon Explorer is our other Splunking. This is 2 and a green for a 2/4 Insect Scout that says lands you control enter untapped. So the same thing that Splunking gives us, making so all of our tap lands, or lands that would come in tapped from some other effect like Farseek, just don't. And whenever we attack a player, we make a lander token. That's why this creature is in this section, because we get repeatable Wayfarer's Baubles, repeatable lander tokens. Every time we attack, we get access to an extra rampant growth effect. Wow, that's great. Lumbering World Wagon is next. I just really like this one. This is 2 and a green for a star 4 vehicle with power equal to the number of lands we control. And whenever it enters or attacks, we can search our library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. So, again, like Earthbender Ascension, it's 1 more mana than Rampant Growth, and it's letting us Rampant Growth when it comes in. And for that extra mana, what we get is a star 4 that will Rampant Growth more for us, and all we have to do is crew it with crew 4. Amazing. Who's got a 4 power? Tam does. Awesome. Love this. We've seen Erycthes. Even if it isn't a land, it taps for green and blue. We've seen Migration Path, which is an explosive vegetation, but we haven't seen Evasion of Zendikar yet. This is another explosive vegetation in the form of a siege. If you haven't seen battles before, the way sieges work is this. You cast this for 3 and a green, and when it resolves, you choose an opponent to protect it. Then, you and everyone else besides that opponent you chose can attack it the same way you could attack a planeswalker controlled by that opponent. Even though they don't control Invasion of Zendikar, we do, because it's our card. They are only protecting it. And likewise, they can block any of the attacks against Invasion of Zendikar the same way they could block any attacks against a planeswalker they controlled. Each damage that Invasion of Zendikar is dealt removes one of these 3 defense counters that it comes in with, and once it runs out of them, it is defeated. Once it's defeated, no matter who has damaged it and brought it to 0, we, since we control it, exile it, and we can cast it transformed without paying any mana cost because it doesn't have one. The only way to cast it on the side is to defeat it. So yeah. So that's how sieges work. But what do we get for it? Well, for 3 and a green, when it enters, we get to search our library for up to 2 basic lands, put them on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So it's just explosive vegetation that sits around waiting to be defeated, and once it is, it comes in as Awakened Skyclave, a 4/4 elemental with vigilance and haste that says as long as it is on the battlefield, it's a land in addition to its other types, and it taps to add 1 mana of any color. Especially nice because as soon as it comes in, it's got haste. So even though it's a creature and a land, it has haste, so we can tap it for mana right away. We can attack with it as a 4/4 and then tap it for mana, whatever we need. But it's especially nice because notice, Invasion of Zendikar came in and found us 2 lands, which is 2 landfall triggers. And then when we defeat it, this comes in, and as long as it's on the battlefield, it's a land, so it's another landfall trigger. This is a secret land, kind of. So yeah, very cool. I really like Invasion of Zendikar. We've seen Migration Path. Proctor's Gaze is next. This is one of our removal spells for 2 and a green and a blue. We get an instant that says return up to 1 target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. That can be an opponent's permanent. It can be one of ours to protect ourselves. Whatever we need to do. Maybe we want to re-trigger some more interest triggers. It seems good. And we get a free Rampant Growth on top of it. Search your library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. I know you're thinking, we must have a lot of basic lands in this deck in order to make this work. Yes, we do. We've seen the Solemn Simulacrum, enters and Rampant Growths us. We have not yet seen the Earth King. The Earth King is 3 and a green for a 2/2 legendary human noble ally that when it enters, makes a 4/4 green bear creature token, which of course is Bosco. If you have seen Avatar, you probably like these characters. And it says, whenever one or more creatures we control with power 4 or greater attack, we rampant growth. We search for a basic, that many basics. A number of basics equal to the number of creatures power 4 or greater that are attacking. They get to all go on the battlefield tapped. Neat. So, the Earth King gives us the ability to do that with Bosco. We get 6 power and toughness for only 4 mana, and when we attack with Bosco, with our commander, or with anything else with power 4 or greater, we get to throw that many basic lands out of our library and onto the battlefield. Great. Nissa Who Shakes the World is next. If you played during War of the Spark Standard, you remember the terror that was this card. 3 and double green gives us a 5 loyalty Nissa Planeswalker with the static ability, whenever we tap a forest for mana, we add an additional green. Does not say basic forest. So all of our dual typed lands, of which we don't have a huge number in this deck, but we do have a few, are all now lands that make 2 mana, a green and whatever else we wanted to tap them for. Great. We can +1 Nissa to put 3 1/1 counters on up to 1 target non-creature land we control and untap it, and it becomes a 0/0 elemental creature with vigilance and haste that's still a land. So this is not earthbending, but it does make that land into a creature permanently. It puts counters on it, it untaps it, and it gives it vigilance and haste. So pretty nice, another way to animate our lands. And if we -8 Nissa, which we can get to in this deck, you get an emblem with lands you control have indestructible. So now all of these land creatures are also indestructible. Pretty good. And then we get to search our library for any number of forest cards, put them on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. Any number means we go through our library and find all of the other forests we have. We have a total in this deck of 18 forests. We probably have a few in play by the time Nissa is able to do this, but imagine going and searching for 6 lands, 8 lands, 10 lands even, that are all forest typed, some of which are dual typed, but they come in, they're all indestructible, and we get all of those landfall triggers if we have, landfall creatures in play. Pretty good. We've seen Kodama of the East Tree. As I've already explained, it gives us the ability to ramp by putting in things that we didn't pay for, which is, since we're not having to pay for it, that's sort of acceleration. Titania's Command is next. 4 and double green for a sorcery that says choose 2. Exile target player's graveyard, and you gain 1 life for each card exiled this way. Search your library for up to 2 land cards, put them on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. It does not say basic. Create 2 2/2 green bear creature tokens, or put 2 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. Notably, whenever you do a modal spell, no matter which modes you choose, it resolves them in order, which means if we make these bears, they will get counters on them if we also choose to do the counters mode. But typically what we're using this for is to find more lands. It doesn't have to find basics, so we find whatever we're looking for, and then do we need bears? Do we need counters? Do we need to get rid of someone's graveyard, or do we need to gain life? Sky's the limit for us with Titania's Command. Next we have Beanstalk Giant. This is an adventure creature. For 6 and a green, we get a star giant with power and toughness, each equal to the number of lands we control. So another Maros. That's pretty good. But it also has a sorcery called Fertile Footsteps attached to it. This is an adventure, meaning for 2 and a green, we can cast this while this card is in our hand instead of casting the giant. And if we do, we resolve it, which is search your library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield, and shuffle. So it's not rampant growth because it doesn't come in tapped. And then, when you cast the adventure, you exile the card, and you can play the creature from exile. Does not have to be on a later turn, even if you have 7 mana, which maybe you do, since you just put a land into play untapped. So either you have to go on the adventure first, and then find the Beanstalk Giant, or you just play the giant. You cannot play Fertile Footsteps once the giant is already in play, unless you find a way to get it back in your hand, and then you follow the process of cast the adventure, it goes to exile, cast the giant from exile. So there you go. And then Glacier Godma, of course, enters and makes a lander token, which is another one of our landers, so another Wayfarer's Bauble, so another source of rampant growths. Great. That is our very large ramp section. Goes very well with our extra land drop section. Next up is interaction. This is our section that I've just tagged as removal. We've already seen Bushwhack. It lets us choose to have one of our creatures fight a different creature we don't control. Broken Bond can destroy an artifact or an enchantment. Collective Resistance is 1 and a green for an instant with Escalate for a green, meaning we get to choose one of these modes, but we can choose more than one if we want. And for each one we choose beyond the first, we pay an extra green. So we can get all 3 of these for a total of 1 and triple green if we want. And what we get to do is destroy an artifact, destroy an enchantment, or give target creature hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. It does not say creature you control, so we can use this politically. We can try and save a creature that we make a deal with an opponent to save from a different opponent's effect, or we do it because maybe they have a creature that's helping us out a lot more than it's helping the rest of the table. So yeah, it's a good possibility for us. But usually we use this to save our commander, so we don't have to recast Tam and then re-prepare her and then recast the Deep Sight spell again. But we might have another creature we would rather save beyond her too. Or maybe we're just paying 1 and double green and destroying an artifact and an enchantment. Whatever we may need. Next is Curse of the Swine. Great card. X and double blue for a sorcery that says exile X target creatures, and for each creature exiled this way, its controller creates a 2/2 green boar creature token. We get rid of whatever creatures we need to and make them into pigs. There is a terrific token for this, which has got like Cetessan armor from Theros, as you can see, with a pig. Just great token. Love this card. We've seen Hunter's Talent. Its first chapter ability, or its first level ability, is a Rabid Bite effect. We haven't seen Bridgeworks Battle. This is 2 and a green for a sorcery that says target creature you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn, and it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. So just a nice fight effect. Solid for our bigger creatures, a great way to get rid of another creature. And it's set on Eldraine, which is my favorite plane. But this is also a modal double-faced card. We can also play its backside as Tanglespan Bridgeworks, which is a land that we can pay 3 life and it comes in untapped, or we can just let it come in tapped, and it taps for green. So this is another one of our sneaky bonus lands, which Moxfield is calculating here, because the calculation includes modal double-faced cards. So I think of this deck as having 41 lands, but with some sneaky ones like Arixmethes and Bridgework Battle. So yeah, we're just running 3 more lands than normal, plus some additional ways of having cards that are lands. So yeah, nice. Imprisoned in the Moon is next. This is 2 and a blue for an aura that enchants a creature, land, or planeswalker, and makes that permanent into a colorless land that taps for colorless mana and causes it to lose all other card types and abilities. This card is great. It is my favorite way of dealing with big creatures or planeswalkers that I'm not able to kill otherwise, particularly commanders, because this just enchants that creature, and unless the controller has a way to interact with their own lands or with enchantments, that creature is just going to be stuck as a land until they find a way to interact with that. Which means if an opponent's running a deck that's really depending on its commander, then imprisoning that commander in the moon is a good way to give them a little bit of acceleration and a lot of heartache. So yeah, it's a solid removal spell in blue. Proctor's Gaze, as we've already seen, lets us bounce an on-land permanent. That's good. Vorinclex, on the Grand Evolution side, gives all of our creatures the ability to fight other creatures for just a single generic mana. And Grappling Kraken, whenever we have a land come in, we can tap an opponent's creature down and put a stun counter on it. So pretty basic removal, but good flexibility within it. That's our interaction section. We do have 2 Wraths in this deck, even though Uro has the word Wrath in it. Yeah. So Teferi's Ultimate is technically a Wrath for 1 player. Not likely to come up, but you never know. We could probably get there in this deck. And we're also running Flood of Tears, a card that I rarely run as a board wipe, but I just liked its effect better in this deck than I normally would for something like Aetherize, or even River's Rebuke. So this is 4 and double blue for a sorcery that says return all non-land permanents to their owner's hands. That includes all of ours. And if we return 4 or more non-token permanents we control this way, we get to put a permanent from our hand onto the battlefield. So because this deck has so much land in it, and so much land-based ramp, and ways to play extra land drops, oftentimes Flood of Tears is going to hit the battlefield, or hit the game, And we're going to be so far ahead in terms of mana production, in terms of lands, than our opponents are, that we're going to much more easily be able to rebuild than anyone else, even if it's happening on a turn where we've just spent 6 of our mana to do this board wipe. Especially because if this is happening, we definitely want to time it, if we're able to, so that we are bouncing at least 4 of our own non-token permanents, so that we get to take the most valuable or expensive of them and put it right back into play, which makes up for the fact that we spent 6 of our mana on Flood of Tears. Hopefully, we have enough mana left over that we can cast at least 1 or 2 more spells from our hand at that point. So yeah, that is our bigger board wipe for the deck. And that covers our support section. I'm going to go through several other sections now that are meant to supplement our game plan, starting with our synergy section. These are all cards that either help us do what we're doing or care about the number of things we have going on. For example, Gene Morphomago cares about us getting up to 6 or more lands, so that when its landfall trigger goes off, we make the creature we choose into a 6/6 instead of a 3/3. Horizon Explorer and Spelunking are both in this section because they give us the effect of letting our lands enter untapped. That seems pretty good. Scoot Swarm cares about us getting up to a total of 6 or more lands, just like Gene Morphomago, so, because it's at that point that we get to make extra Scoots rather than just, 1/1 insects. Case of the Locked Hothouse wants us to get up to 7 or more lands so that we can solve it and be able to play creatures and enchantments and lands off the top of our library. And Jadzi cares about us having, on the backside, 8 or more lands once this, or as this is resolving, or in the middle of it resolving, once we put lands from our hand onto the battlefield, so that we can then discard a card and bounce it to our hand so that we can do it again. And that covers our synergy cards. Let's talk now about our Maros. These are all cards that, like we've already seen with like Bralios, have power and toughness based on the number of lands we control. So we've seen Bralios, we've seen Beanstalk Giant, and we've seen Bo, Bonnie Paul's Ox. Now we have Sandman Shifting Scoundrel. This is 1 and double green for a star legendary sand elemental villain with power and toughness each equal to the number of lands we control. So a 3-mana Maro is pretty good. It can't be blocked by creatures power 2 or less, so probably it's going to come in at least as a 3/3, so yeah, pretty good kind of evasion. And for 3 and double green, we can return this card and target land card from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped, meaning we can spend 5 mana to get back our 3/3 huge creature, and if we have land in our graveyard in the process, we'll get that back too, bringing Sandman back even bigger than he was. We also have Multani, Yavamaya's avatar, 4 and double green for a 0/0 legendary elemental avatar with reach and trample that gets +1/+1 for each land we control and each land card in our graveyard. So even better than the other Maros that we have, plus reach and trample. And we can pay 1 and a green and return 2 lands we control to their owner's hand to return Multani from our graveyard to our hand. A way to recur Multani that does put lands back in our hand, which sets us back on mana just a tiny little bit, but also gives us the ability to replay those lands, thereby triggering any other landfall triggers we may want, or we may have. Plus, we get to put Multani back, and he's gigantic, probably, with reach and trample. Nice. So that covers our Maro section. Next, we have our mana sinks. These are all cards that give us ways to spend the mana that we have if we maybe don't have spells, and we're just waiting to get another land in hand so that we're able to re-trigger Tam, re-prepare her, and then draw more cards. If we just have extra mana, we can use them on these mana sinks. So Hormigaunt Horde, as we've already seen, lets us cast it with X in its casting cost, so that we can maybe draw cards off of it, but just make a bigger creature. Curse of the Swine also has X in its cost, so we can pump our mana into that. Biomechan Engineer, we can spend 8 to draw 2 cards and make a 2/2 robot. Doppelgang, we haven't talked about yet, but we will in just a moment. Joriel, we can spend a bunch of mana to make all of our creatures' power and toughness equal to the number of cards we have in hand. And Loot, we can spend 6 mana to look at the top 6 and maybe rocket a creature out from those 6 directly onto the battlefield. Doppelgang is rad. Doppelgang is triple X, a green and a blue, for a sorcery that says for each of X target permanents, create X tokens that are copies of that permanent. Meaning, X, if X is 1, we're spending 5 mana, because that's 1, 1, 1, and then 2 more for a total of 5. If X is 3, we're spending 11 mana. 3, 3, 3 is 9, plus 2 more is 11. But that means If X is 1, we're spending 5 mana to make a copy of any permanent, including permanents we don't control, including our own lands, including any non-creature. Normally the going rate for a clone spell is 4, so spending 4 mana to make a copy of a creature is normal. Spending 5 mana to make a copy of any permanent, including lands, including our opponent's stuff, is pretty okay, but it just goes up from there, because if we're spending, instead of 5 mana, 8 mana for X equals 2, what happens is we choose 2 different permanents, and we get 2 copies of each of them. So if we have Biomech and Engineer and Hormigaunt Horde in play, and we spend 8 mana by making X equals 2 for Doppelgang, targeting these 2, we will get 2 additional Hormigaunt Hordes and 2 additional Biomech and Engineers, each of which will come in and make an extra lander token for us. So now we've got 3 total of each of these, 2 tokens and the original. So we spent 8 mana to go from 2 creatures in play to 6 creatures in play. That seems pretty solid, depending on the creatures we choose. Obviously, if we were to choose Joriel or something, Joriel would give us a legendary token copy, which would mean we'd have to legend rule it away. But maybe we care about creatures coming into play, maybe we just have better things to choose, like lands. Now, of course, like I mentioned, we can hit our opponent's stuff, but just imagine seeing someone cast Doppelgang for 11 mana, X equals 3. They target 3 different lands, either theirs or someone else's. And now they have 9 new lands to play, because each of those 3 lands gets 3 copies of it made. So total of 9 lands. We get all of the landfall triggers from that. We get all of the mana, because they come in untapped, assuming they would have come in untapped anyway. And so we spent 11 mana, and we get to we essentially just spent 2 mana on it, because we get all of that back. There's so much cool stuff you can do with this. And so yeah, being sort of a toolboxy card in our big mana Simic deck, yeah, it feels good. It can often just win us the game, so yeah, pretty nice. So that is our mana sink section. Next up, we have our section of Recursion. These are all cards that give us ways to either replay them or other cards from our graveyard. Hormigaunt Horde, we can pay 3 mana whenever we get a landfall trigger to bring it back to our hand. Sandman, we can pay 3 and double green to bring it and a land from our graveyard back to our hand. Uro, we can cast from our graveyard using Escape. Bonnie Paul can let us play lands from our graveyard as part of that attack trigger once we draw a card. Multani, we can bounce 2 lands and bring it back from our graveyard to our hand. And Jadzi can let us discard a card to bounce it, or as part of its resolution, if we have 8 or more lands while Journey to the Oracle is resolving, we can discard a card to bounce it back to our hand. We also have Conduit of Worlds. This is 2 and double green for an artifact that lets us play lands from our graveyard, so it's a Crucible of Worlds. That's pretty solid. If we get lands in our graveyard somehow, there are a few ways we can do that, like milling 10 on the backside of Vorinclex, the Grand Evolution. Which I guess I should mention right now. I could have mentioned it earlier. If you like Vorinclex and you think it's a cool card, check out the video's description, because I definitely made a commander deck with that Vorinclex and did not mention it until now. So yeah, that'll be linked in the video's description. Anyway, Conduit of Worlds also lets us, beyond just playing lands from our graveyard, it lets us tap it and choose target non-land permanent card in our graveyard. If we haven't cast a spell this turn, we can cast that card, and if we do, we can't cast additional spells this turn, and all this only is a sorcery. So essentially what this means is, do we have a non-land permanent card in our graveyard? If we want to cast it from our graveyard, and we're willing to make that the only spell we cast this turn, both before and after we cast that, then we can do so. So it's a Conduit of Worlds gives us a way to get back everything that isn't a land or basically that isn't an instant or sorcery, is what I should say, because we can get back lands by playing them from the graveyard, and anything else that's not an instant or sorcery, which is to say a permanent card, by recasting it from the graveyard. We don't have as much recursion in this deck as there are versions of the deck that you could have with more recursion. So Conduit of Worlds is an easy replacement in this deck, even if you just want to add a 40-second land. But I think it's pretty solid for what it does, and having the option to recur things is pretty sweet. So yeah. Finally, in this section, we have Titania Nature's Force. This is 4 and double green for a 6/6 legendary elemental. This was originally printed in the Brothers War Commander product. Yeah, so you may not have seen this Titania before. She lets us play forests from our graveyard. Again, we've got 18 forests in this deck, so if they end up in our graveyard somehow, which we'll see a little bit more of in a moment, we can play them from the graveyard. And whenever a forest we control enters, doesn't have to be a basic, we make a 5/3 green elemental creature token, the classic Titania effect. And whenever an elemental we control dies, of which we have those elemental creature tokens, but we also have 5 other elemental cards in this deck, like Multani and Sandman. Whenever our elementals die, we can choose to mill 3 cards. We don't have to, but if we want to, we can. And that either lets us maybe find a forest we can play from our graveyard and thereby get more elementals, or maybe it puts some things in our graveyard that we can get back with Conduit of Worlds. That's also fine. So yeah. Also, if we're looking for other ways that things might end up in the graveyard, like forests or anything we want to cast from here, Jadzi does give us 2 ways to discard cards. So yeah, options. That is our recursion section. Let's go now to our pump section. These are all cards that give us ways to make our creatures bigger, and we have seen all but one of them. Gene Morphomago, with its Landfall trigger, can make a creature's base power and toughness 3/3 or 6/6. Jor-El can make all our creatures' base power and toughness into the number of cards we have in hand. Hunter's Talent can give +1/+0 and trample whenever we have an attacking creature at level 2. Earthbender Ascension, whenever it's got enough quest counters on it, has a landfall trigger to put a 1/1 counter on one of our creatures and give it trample until end of turn. Vorinclex, on the backside, the second chapter of the Grand Evolution, can let us distribute 7 +1/+1 counters. Primeval Bounty lets us put 3 1/1 counters on a creature whenever we cast a non-creature spell. Titania's Command lets us put 2 1/1 counters on each creature we control if we choose that last mode, and Glacier Godmaw can give all of our creatures +1/+1, Vigilance, and Haste whenever we have our landfall trigger. But the only other card in this section is Comforting Counsel. This is 1 and a green for an enchantment that says whenever you gain life, put a growth counter on this enchantment. Again, no inherent meaning, just used by the card. And as long as there are 5 or more growth counters on this enchantment, creatures you control get +3/+3. Just as a constant effect. So this is, again, another do-nothing enchantment until it does everything. Because this is our only payoff in the deck for gaining life. That's why Willow Dusk is on it. We gain life in a number of different ways. For example, Titania's Command can exile a player's graveyard and we gain 1 life for each card exiled that way. That's 1 instance of life gain, but we can sure gain it. But particularly, Tam's Prepare spell, Deep Sight, draws us a card and gains us a life. So we only have to do that a few times over the course of a few turns to get to the point that Comforting Counsel, which we've probably played earlier than our commander, assuming we drew it then, we get Comforting Counsel up to 5 growth counters, and suddenly our board is huge. All of those 0/1 tokens that Avenger of Zendikar makes, yeah, they can grow when we have Landfall, but what if they just come in as 3/4s because Comforting Counsel's online? This can really be a surprise to our fellow players. And if our board is wide enough, and it probably is, because we have plenty of creatures in the deck and so many tokens, which we'll see in a moment, Comforting Counsel giving everything a permanent giant growth, like we can come out of nowhere and just win the game with that in a little bit more of a sort of traditional way, but just as surprising and fun of a way as Doppelgang. So that covers our pump section. Let's take a look at all those tokens that we've been making. I think we've seen all of these, so I'm just going to sort of blow through them. Biomech and Engineer can make us a 2/2 robot. Doppelgang can make us copies of as many things as we want to pay for. Emrakul's Messenger and Jor-El both trigger on our second draw and make us either that 0/1 Eldrazi spawn we can crack for mana, or a 2/2 green cat. Springheart Nantuko and Scoot Swarm both trigger on landfall and make us a 1/1 insect, or a copy of what it's enchanting, or a copy of the Scoot Swarm. Wingblade Disciple makes us a 1/1 flyer when we cast our second spell each turn. Earth King comes in and comes with Bosco, a 4/4 green bear, which is not legendary, but that's his name. Teferi, whenever we draw a card, gets a loyalty counter and makes these spirit tokens that whenever we draw a card get 1/1 counters. Bonnie Paul has a bow that she comes with, which is a legendary creature and is a Maro. Primeval Bounty, whenever we cast a creature spell, we get a 3/3 beast. Rampaging Baloths, whenever we have Landfall, we get a 4/4 beast. Titania, whenever we have a forest enter, so not quite all Landfall, but every one of our forests, gives us a 5/3 element. Titania's Command can make us 2/2 bears, and Avenger of Zendikar enters and makes us a number of 0/1 green plant creature tokens for each land we control. So that covers all of our tokens, but maybe we have some things that can stand in like tokens, not quite the same as tokens. We can use our lands as in that same way. We've already seen both of these. Earthbender Ascension can earthbend when it first comes in, one of our lands, which doesn't make it into a token, but it does make one of our lands into a creature, and that's pretty nice. And Nissa can +1 to make one of our lands into a creature, put 3 counters on it, give it vigilance and haste, and it's still a land. And since it has haste, of course, it can, even if it came in that turn, it can tap for mana. There are lots of other ways to go into the Animate Lands theme in the Considering section at the bottom of this Moxfield list. So if you like that as a theme for TAM, check out that Considering section and you will see plenty more beyond just the 2 that I stuck with. So that covers our Animate Lands section. Let's look at our protection right now. We've got a couple of ways to protect us. Collective Resistance can give one of our target creatures hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Proctor's Gaze can bounce a non-land permanent, which is usually something we're going to use as interaction, but we can sure hit one of our own things with it if we don't want to have it go to the graveyard, or we don't want to have to recast TAM from the command zone. It's a possibility. And Nissa, if we ultimate her, gives us an emblem that makes all of our lands indestructible, and that's not nothing. I definitely played against someone who just ran an Armageddon, like a white border Armageddon at like a casual commander night. So sometimes you play with those people. Anyway, that's our protection section. Our last section for spells is Evasion. These are cards that help us get past our opponent's stuff, and we don't have a lot of ways to do that aren't just having big creatures or a lot of creatures. But Hunter's Talent's second ability, or second level, I should say, gives one of our attacking creatures +1/+0 and trample, and Earthbender Ascension has, once we have enough quest counters on it, whenever we have Landfall, we're going to put a 1/1 counter on one of our creatures, and it will gain trample until end of turn. So that covers all of the spells in our deck. As usual, we're going to go over our land base now, starting with our basics. We are running 21 basic lands in this deck, because we've got a total, like I mentioned before, of 41 lands, plus a few sneaky ones. Modal Double-Faced Card, Erixmathes, the backside of Invasion of Zendikar. These are extra cards that are lands, and of course we could doppelgang if we want to make more lands in here. But just in our base, we've gone above our 38 land floor by 3, as you will be able to count as we go. So 21 basics. We're running twice as many forests as islands. If you wanted to be more proportional, you could even go heavier on the green, but I always like to err a little bit toward more the mean, simply because I don't want to I want to have plenty of lands to play my cards, and I don't want to get stuck on having the wrong color or colors. So this balance tends to work pretty well, at least in my testing. We're running Rainslicked Copse. This is a bicycle land. It is a forest island, meaning it has both types. This will trigger Titania, and we can play this from our graveyard with Titania if we were to want to do that, and there's a way for us to do it. But we can also find it with Farseek, since it's an island. It comes in taps for green or blue, since it's a forest and an island, but it also has cycling for 2 generic mana, meaning we can pay 2 and discard it from our hand to draw a card. Something we might do if, again, we're desperate for card draw. Not usually a thing in this deck, but you never know. Or if we draw this late game and we just don't need the land in that moment. Maybe we discard it by cycling it, draw a card, and then play it as our land for turn using one of our abilities that lets us play lands from our graveyard, like Titania, since it's a forest. Or just attack while Bonnie Paul is out, and we can put it into play using that attack trigger. So yeah, bicycle lands I really think are great. If you want to upgrade this, I think Breeding Pool, the shock land, is probably your best bet. It does not give you the ability to cycle it, but you could have it come in untapped, even without Splunking in play, by paying 2, and it still has the basic land types. We're running Simic Growth Chamber. I have stopped running bounce lands. I stopped quite a while ago, actually, in my decks. But in a deck that cares about landfall, they can really be helpful. And they're cool lands. I just don't typically run them in my decks because they're a little bit slower than I typically want. So the way this works is this is a land that comes in tapped, and when it enters, we have to bounce a land we control to its owner's hand. That's why they're called bounce lands. But it taps for 2 mana, a green and a blue. So the idea is, if you have a basic forest in play, you tap it for mana, then play your Simic Growth Chamber, which will come in tapped, and you bounce that forest, but you've already gotten the mana out of it. Now it's in your hand, and you can play it during your next turn, which means Simic Growth Chamber has guaranteed you are making your land drop the turn after you play this, and you're not behind on mana, because you had turn 1 play the forest, turn 2 play the Growth Chamber, turn 3 play the forest again. Now it's turn 3, and you have access to 3 mana, because the Growth Chamber makes 2 mana. However, The scenario I just gave you with turns 1, 2, 3, you want to avoid it, because in Commander, you draw on your first turn, even if you're the first player. So turn 1, you draw a card, you're at 8 cards in hand, you play your forest, you're at 7. Turn 2, you draw a card, you're at 8 cards in hand, you play Simic Growth Chamber, you bounce the forest, you're at 8 cards in hand still, since you played one out of it but put one back in it. If you didn't also cast a spell on the last turn or on this turn, you're going to have to go to discard on turn 2, which probably you don't want. Who knows? Maybe you've got Titania in hand and you're expecting to get there and be able to return a forest from your graveyard. But yeah, Simic Growth Chamber can be really great for you as a way to make additional land drops, and of course to hit your land drops every turn when you want to. Next up, we are running Hinterland Harbor. This is a check land, meaning it taps for green or blue, and it enters tapped unless we control a forest or an island. We are running 21 basic forests and islands, plus we've got some dual-typed lands. I think we've got a total of 25 lands in this deck that are forests and or islands, meaning 1/4 of our deck makes this come in as an untapped dual. So I don't think there's really any reason to have to upgrade this. Spend 15 cents and have an untapped dual most of the time in this deck. Amazing. Restless Vinestalk is next. I don't run creature lands in every deck, but they're fun, and this is a really sweet one from Wilds of Eldraine. This is a tap land that taps for green or blue, and if we pay 3 of green and a blue until end of turn, it becomes a 5/5 green and blue plant creature token, or creature with trample that's still a land. So a couple of things worth noting. This is another mana sink. I don't include my lands in my spell tags, but it's worth noting that you can use this as a mana sink and get a sudden 5/5 creature that you can attack with, you can block with, whatever you need to do. The other thing to note is that it is a plant, which means if Avenger of Zendikar is in play, we can animate the Restless Vinestalk and then play a land, getting that trigger off of Avenger of Zendikar and putting a 1/1 counter on each of our plants, which will include the Vinestalk. That counter doesn't do anything on the Vinestalk unless it is a creature, but while it's a creature, great. You can get counters on it thanks to Avenger of Zendikar. Neat. And it says whenever this land attacks, up to 1 other target creature has base power and toughness 3/3 until end of turn. We use this the same way we use the Gene Morphimago's first half of its landfall trigger. We can use this to pump up one of our smaller creatures. Maybe we make one of our 0/1 plant creature tokens from Avenger of Zendikar into a 3/3 until end of turn. We can attack with it. Or we make one of the Scoot Swarms into a 3/3, whatever we need. Or we can take this, and since we're attacking with a 5/5 anyway, we just take, if our opponent doesn't have that many blockers, or doesn't have many blockers that are threatening, except for one, we make their most threatening blocker into something that will die if it blocks the Restless Vinestalk. Neat. Next, we are running both of the filter lands in our colors. Overflowing Basin is a land that if you pay 1 into it and then tap it, it makes a green and a blue. So we're tapping 2 sources, whatever we're paying the basin with, and the basin itself, to get 2 mana, but it makes both of our colors, so it's fixing our mana, which is why this is a filter land. We've also got Flooded Grove, which is a land that can tap for colorless on its own, but if we pay a blue or a green into it and tap it, we can get 2 green, 2 blue, or 1 of each, which is very nice for us, especially since this can tap for mana on its own, and the Overflowing Basin can't. But the one thing about Flooded Grove you should note is unless you have colored mana to put into it, it can't make colored mana. It can only make colorless mana unless you're filtering a green or blue through it. Whereas the Overflowing Basin, you can put colorless mana, any kind of mana, into it and it will make colored mana. So both of these cards have a place in our deck. So we're running them both. Next, we've got all of our fixing lands. Of course, we're running Command Tower. It's an untapped land with the same text as Arcane Signet. Add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity, which is, in this deck, it's an untapped blue and green dual land. That's great. Of course we'll run that. Similarly, we'll run Path of Ancestry, which is a tap land that has the same text as Command Tower, which is okay. A tap land that makes both of our colors is fine. We've got several different versions of that. But Path of Ancestry also says when we use its mana to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type with our commander, we get a free Scry 1. Now, we don't have that many cards in this deck that do that. We have no other Gorgons and only 2 other Wizards. But Tam shares card types with herself, creature types with herself. meaning when we use Path of Ancestry's mana to cast her, we'll get that scry. So a tap land that gives us a little bit of extra value and makes all of our colors, sure, that works for me. We're also running Blighted Woodland. This is an untapped land that taps for colorless, and if we pay 3 and a green and tap and sack it, we get to Explosive Vegetation. Search for 2 basics, put them on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So oftentimes in my decks, I will put Myriad Landscape, which doesn't require as much mana to activate, but also comes in tapped and requires you to find 2 basics that are different types. Blighted Woodland goes into my green decks typically because they can make green mana, and this kind of ability to come in untapped and make mana right away is more valuable in them a lot of the time. So this is a great little bit of additional acceleration in our land base. Similarly, Temple of the False God. It's not everyone's favorite land, but it's an untapped land that makes 2 colorless mana, like Soul Ring. So it's a soul land. We just have to have at least 4 other lands in play in order to activate it at all, so 5 lands including itself. Meaning this is acceleration in our land base, it's just not acceleration in the early game. But in this deck, which has so many ways of getting lands out faster than just 1 per turn, Temple of the False God can become a jump from 4 mana to 6 mana earlier than turn 5. So yeah, this is a solid card in every kind of budget deck that you want to play Commander in, especially ones that have expensive spells like this one, or that want a double spell like this one. Yeah, it's just a solid include. We're running Yavimaya Coast. This is a pain land. It's a land that taps for colorless mana, but also taps for green or blue if we're willing to let it do a damage to us. The way I normally describe this is you're always willing to let it do a damage to you, because if you need colored mana, what does it mean to need colored mana? It means that being able to tap this for green or blue is the difference between playing another spell on your turn or not playing that spell. So would you pay an extra life in order to cast 1 more spell that you were going to be able to on your turn? I would every time. If you do that 6, 7, 8 times during the game, I know you're thinking, oh, I've lost 6 to 8 life. Yeah, but you've cast 6 or 8 more spells. And what's the likeliest person at the table who's going to win? It's the person who's done the most at the table, who's played the most spells, the most magic. And if you don't need colored mana, you can always tap it for colorless mana. So this is a great deal no matter what. We've got Vineglimmer Snarl. Oh, I guess I should mention, I don't think that there's a great upgrade for Pain lands. I think they're terrific untapped duels. But if you wanted to side grade this to Bark Channel Pathway, that's an option. The pathways are modal double-faced lands that are untapped on both sides, and the front side makes a green, and the back side makes a blue, and you can't flip it unless you bounce it to your hand somehow, like Civic Growth Chamber, or it gets destroyed and you play it again from the graveyard, or return it to your hand. So they are $3 or $4 or $5 a piece, so I wouldn't probably swap to it, but it's an option for you if you're thinking about upgrades or like more premium lands, or you could just add that in place of one of these 21 basics. It's a possibility. Vineglimmer Snarl is next. This is a reveal land. It taps for green or blue, and as it enters, we may reveal a forest or island card from our hand, and if we don't, it comes in tapped. So the chance that we're playing this either turn 1 or 2 when we don't need its mana right away, so we just play it tapped, or any other turn of the game where it requires us to have a forest or island in our hand in order to come in as an untapped duel. We draw so many cards, we have so many lands in our deck, and 25 of our lands are either forests or islands. Vineglimmer Snarl is only occasionally going to be a tapped duel. Just very strong for us as a good sort of check land style option. If you want to upgrade this, it's expensive, but Willow Rush Verge is a Verge land that will come in untapped, will make 1 color, and if you have an island or a forest in play, it'll make the other color as well. But the Verges are currently being played a lot in Standard, so they're not cheap. So I recommend this reveal land as the less expensive option. We've got Temple of Mystery. It's one of the temples, so it's a scry land. Comes in tapped. Scries when it does, and it makes green or blue. Great. Not much to say about it. It's been reprinted a lot. It's in Foundations. Very inexpensive. Gives you selection, gives you your colors. It's everything you want without spending the mana on a Hedge Maze, which is the Surveil land upgrade to this. Pretty expensive, but it's dual typed, and it gives you a Surveil, which is a little bit better than a Scry, and also taps your colors. So yeah. We're running Dreamroot Cascade because even though the slow lands have, up until recently, up until Secrets of Strixhaven, been expensive, and been the thing that I recommend people upgrade from a check land if they want to, it's now just sort of an inexpensive inclusion in the sort of check reveal slow land cycle, quote unquote, or suite of cards, I guess. This is a land that enters tapped unless we control 2 or more other lands. Doesn't matter what kind of lands they are, they just have to be lands. So turns 1, or if this is land 1 or land 2, yeah, it's a tap land, but every other time it's an untapped dual, so that's great. So yeah, reveal land, check land, slow land, all together in Commander are a sweet little suite of lands. Next, we've got Sodden Verdure, which is a recent addition to the Tangle land cycle. This is another typed dual. It's a forest and an island, and it enters tapped unless we control 2 or more basic lands. So this is the same text as the slow land that we just saw, except it requires that the lands that are already in play be basic. We've got 21 basics in this library. In this deck, it's so easy for us to have the Verdure enter untapped, and even if it comes in tapped, that's okay, because it's dual typed. As are both of these other typed duals. Tangled Islet is just a forest and island that comes in tapped. We can Farseek for this, we can play it from our graveyard with Titania, since it's a forest, it's an island, whatever we need. The only difference between it and the Rinewood Falls is a snow land, not relevant in this deck, but just really nice art, and so we've got these options. I included these rather than more expensive lands or just some more basics because we've got several different ways that care about our lands land types. So I figured we might as well have some more fixing when it comes to these, since we're running extra lands beyond our normal. So yeah, obviously you can upgrade either of these to any other typed land. Same is true for Sodden Verdure, which I might go again with Shock Land if you want to do that. But if you've got a Shock Land, run the Verdure and get rid of one of these, or even get rid of another one of these basics. There's lots and lots of great upgrades for this deck, but you don't need to do any of them because this land base works great. So let's talk about our last 3 lands, these utility lands. Alchemist's Refuge is a land that taps for colorless, comes in untapped, and if we pay a green and a blue and tap it, we can cast spells this turn as though they had flash. Doesn't require us to activate it on our turn either. So we can do it on our turn and flash things in during combat, during our end step, whatever we need. But we can also pay essentially 3 mana, a blue, a green, and tapping the refuge, and then every other spell we can cast on an opponent's turn if we need to. That includes TAM. That includes Deep Sight on TAM. Whatever we need. Alchemist's Refuge gives us a lot of flexibility with this, so we might as well. Bossing Say is next. This is a third option in this deck for making lands into creatures, because it lets us earthbend. It enters tapped unless we control a basic. It taps for green, and if we pay 2 and a green and tap it, we can earthbend 2 as a sorcery. So tapping 4 lands or 4 mana sources, 2 and a green and Bossing Say, in order to turn 1 more of our lands, or even Bossing Say itself, into a creature, but also protecting that land and that creature because it'll come back from exile and from the graveyard if it goes to either one of those zones, thanks to Earthbend's delayed trigger. That's pretty sweet. I don't normally think of Earthbending as a way to protect your cards, although I do have a Toph deck, Toph the First Metalbender deck, if you want to check out the video description, that goes into that idea a lot. But the point is, being able to use Bossing Say as 1 more mana sink that lets us turn our lands into creatures in case we maybe need some more creatures in play without risking those lands, because they will come back, seems pretty good. Last, we are running Demolition Field. This is, what I normally like to say is, the kind of decks I build are of a budget and a power level that is generally accepted by groups that aren't really looking forward to land denial or land destruction. Mana denial is a thing that is part of Commander, it's part of Magic, but it's not what everyone's looking for in Commander, and since Commander is such a casual format, it's reasonable to expect that it's not going to happen in your experience if that's what you've decided. However, you do have to have answers for problematic non-basics, whether it's Restless Vinestalk or any other creature land that's problematic, whether it's Rogue's Passage, which is making your opponent's huge Voltron commander unblockable, whether it's a Glacial Chasm that someone happens to have that's preventing you from doing your damage. Anything in Magic that empowers someone else's game plan or slows down or stops your own game plan is a threat. And threats need to be answered because Magic is a game of variance and of interaction. Demolition Field is my answer to that kind of problem, and since it's only a one-of kind of answer in this deck, it ends up being pretty acceptable. So this is an untapped land that taps for colorless, or we can pay 2, tap, and sack it to destroy a non-basic land that an opponent controls, and then that opponent can search their library for a basic land and put it on the battlefield untapped. And so can we. So neither player, neither they nor we, are down a land, assuming, of course, we both have basics left in our library, and we probably will, but we've gotten rid of the thing that was messing us up, or that was empowering them more than it needed to. And since no one has been denied mana, really, I mean, I guess we could have blown up their bounce land, so now they have less mana production, but generally we're not trying to just stop someone from their fixing. We're trying to stop them from doing things that are problematic for our game plan or for the table with enhancing their own game plan. So yeah, Demolition Field is something that even tables that don't like mana denial are probably going to be totally fine with, since it replaces those lands. And that sums it up. Again, I'm releasing new Secrets of Strixhaven Commander decks every Thursday through the end of June when Marvel Superheroes drops, so let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a specific commander or style of deck. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you want to support what I do here, make sure to like and subscribe. Ring the bell if you want to be notified when my videos go live. Consider becoming a member of the channel, something I've been doing lately. And remember most of all that Magic is fun. You should play more Magic.